This is Rainy Night Horrors. Outside, the storm brews, and with it comes something darker. Every drop masks a sound, every shadow holds a shape. You're not imagining it. You're hearing the truth. Listen closely. It's already here. That first percussion, faint as moth wings against glass, remains etched in my memory. I was sequestered in my bedroom, the glow of my laptop screen painting my face in the dimness, perched on the edge of my bed. The residence was a sprawling townhouse, a vertical labyrinth I shared with three others, Liam, Maya, and Ben. Private sanctuaries were ours, but the kitchen and living space were communal territory. My room claimed territory on the upper floor. When those initial whisper-soft taps materialized, I dismissed them. The groan of antiquated plumbing, perhaps, or the city breathing fitfully outside my window. I snapped the laptop shut, a yawn cracking my jaw, and courted sleep. Yet the knocking persisted, a delicate, rhythmic insistence against the wood that unsettled something deep within me. Dawn broke, and my attention turned to the closet. An old built-in affair, its heavy timber doors exhaled a scent of dust and time. No breaches marred its surface, no telltale signs of rodents or burrowing insects. I circumnavigated its bulk, rapping my knuckles against the wood, listening for the scurry of tiny feet. Silence answered. My gaze fell upon a shoebox containing important papers resting on the shelf, flanked by a pair of forgotten suitcases slumped on the floorboards. All appeared undisturbed. With a shrug, I plucked clothes from a drawer and surrendered to the day's routine, leaving the house behind for the predictable rhythm of work. For a time, the disturbance remained a murmur at the edge of hearing. Late at night, occasionally, a tentative rapping would emanate from within that closet's shadowed interior. The house's plumbing, I reasoned again. It was a venerable structure. Certain stair treads sang underfoot. Floorboards lamented the wind's passage outside. Worry felt like an indulgence. My housemates were typically downstairs or ensconced in their own rooms. Evenings often found us sprawled in the living room, sharing pizzas and amber bottles of beer. Liam once queried, had I noticed anything peculiar in the night? I offered a non-committal reply, suggesting the sounds were likely just the house's nocturnal soliloquy. But as weeks dissolved into a month, the noise burrowed deeper, demanding attention. There were nights I'd hover on the precipice of sleep, only to be jolted by 3, maybe 4 distinct raps in rapid succession, the unmistakable cadence of knuckles, however light, against wood. I'd hold my breath, suspended, listening, then only silence. My pulse would gradually steady, and I'd whisper the familiar mantra, just the house settling. One particular night, consciousness reclaimed me around 3 a.m. No discernible reason pulled me from sleep. My room lay steeped in quiet, save for the whirring sigh of the electric fan. Then, from the closet, a dull thump, heavier than the delicate taps, possessing a certain weight. I went rigid, eyes locked onto the closet door, every muscle taut. My gaze darted to the handle, motionless. Calm down, I commanded myself. Perhaps something had simply tumbled from the shelf. Yet the following morning's inspection revealed nothing displaced, nothing amiss. Eventually, the current shifted. Talk of moving surfaced among my housemates. Liam and Maya sought cozier confines, a smaller apartment. Ben chased a career opportunity in a distant city. Our disparate schedules had already begun to fray the communal fabric, the townhouse seeming to expand around our shrinking presence. I, however, opted to remain. The arrangement with the landlord was favorable, the location convenient for my commute. Solitude, I mused, might be a welcome change. This was before the knocking shed its timidity. Their departure left a silence that felt cavernous. Nights stretched, lonelier. I'd occupy the downstairs living room, television flickering, yet an insistent prickle crawled up my spine, urging me to peer around corners. A single standing lamp pooled weak light, leaving the periphery in shadow. I kept the kitchen lights extinguished, a nod to frugality. The hallway leading to the staircase acquired a spectral quality after dark, compelling me to slap the light switch before ascending. Each footfall on the stairs elicited a groan from the aged wood. The house itself seemed to exhale with my passage. The closet's soft pronouncements continued intermittently, usually faint whispers in the quiet. Then, roughly a week into my solitary tenancy, insomnia claimed me. My mind raced, a frantic carousel of work deadlines and personal anxieties. I lay supine, staring into the oppressive darkness above, the fan chopping the humid air. Summer held the city in its sweltering grip, and my room, devoid of air conditioning, offered little respite beyond an open window and the fan's meager breeze. Around 2, it began, a soft tapping from the closet's depths, slow, measured, like a polite summons. Adrenaline surged, a cold fist clenching in my gut. My throat constricted. I fought the urge to react, but the taps grew firmer, more deliberate. I pushed myself upright, the sheets clinging damply to my skin. The thought of banishing the dark with light flickered, but instead, I moved, stocking-footed toward the closet door. A floorboard betrayed my stealth with a faint squeak. Pressing my ear flat against the cool wood, I held my breath. On the other side, infinitesimally close, the tapping continued, like knuckles, yet possessed of an unnerving gentleness. My hand closed around the doorknob. A tremor ran through my fingers. Slowly, I turned it. The hinges protested with a low groan as the door swung inward. In that instant, a current of frigid air brushed my face, startlingly cold, like the outflow from an air conditioner, an appliance this house decidedly lacked. It made me recoil. My eyes strained, probing the Stygian interior. I fumbled for my phone, activating its flashlight. The beam sliced through the dark, illuminating shelves, the slumped forms of the suitcases. No movement. I waved a hand tentatively into the space, seeking the source of the draft, but felt nothing consistent. Within seconds, the unnatural chill dissipated, the familiar muggy air reasserting itself. Retreating, I pulled the door shut and sank onto the edge of my bed, heart hammering against my ribs. I rubbed my damp palms against my knees, striving for composure. Sleep was a lost cause. I spent the remaining hours vigilant, watching that inert wooden door until the shrill demand of my 6 a.m. alarm shattered the uneasy quiet. I rose, showered, attempting to sluice away the night's strangeness with the morning routine. The subsequent days unfolded without significant incident, yet a residue of unease coated my room. Entering it, my gaze invariably snapped to the closet. The phantom memory of that cold air lingered, a persistent question mark. I re-examined the closet walls, the back panel, the sides, searching for gaps, vents, any plausible conduit to the outside or another part of the house. Nothing. I checked the hallway walls adjoining it. Solid, continuous. Confiding in a coworker yielded only a shrug and platitudes about the eccentricities of old houses, strange drafts being commonplace. He seemed utterly unperturbed. A few nights later, engrossed in a show on my laptop downstairs, the sound drifted down. It was late, nearing midnight. I paused the stream. Knocks from upstairs. Not loud, but sharp, distinct. Again, the cadence of knuckles on wood. 4 or 5 raps. A breath of silence. Then another volley. A knot tightened in my stomach. Lowering the laptop volume to nothing, I strained to listen. The knocking persisted. I rose, abandoning the shadowed living room, and ascended the stairs, each step deliberate. My heart pulsed erratically. A sheen of sweat slicked my forehead. The hallway light cast a stark illumination. My bedroom door stood ajar. As I crossed the threshold, the knocking ceased abruptly. The closet door remained shut, exactly as I had left it. I approached it, hand hovering over the knob. A moment of internal debate. Did I truly want to breach that threshold again? My palms felt clammy, my breath shallow. Turning the knob, I swung the door wide. The familiar musty scent greeted my nostrils, but no cold air accompanied it this time. Just stagnant darkness. Phone light cutting through the gloom. I scanned the interior. Shelf. Documents nudged aside. The space behind the suitcases. I even rapped my own knuckles against the back panel several times. Utterly mundane. Listening intently revealed only the ambient silence of the house. I closed the door. My hands trembled visibly now, a cord of tension tightening in my neck. Retreating downstairs, I found concentration impossible. The rest of the evening was spent coiled with nervous energy, jumping at every creak. Over the ensuing 2 weeks, I attempted a strategy of willful ignorance, but the knocks wove themselves into the fabric of my nights, sometimes fleeting, sometimes a sustained, minute-long performance. I'd lie rigid in bed, eyes fixed on that impassive wooden rectangle, imagination conjuring horrors I desperately tried to suppress. Retrieving clothes became a swift, surgical operation. Open, grab, slam shut. I began migrating my belongings to the hallway closet, minimizing interaction with the epicenter of my unease. One sun-drenched afternoon, I resolved to conduct a more invasive investigation. Everything was hauled out of the closet. The document box landed on my bed. The suitcases were dragged into the room, their latches sprung. Empty, save for brittle papers and a scattering of faded receipts. I moved them near the doorway, clearing the stage. Then, methodically, I began examining the interior panels, tapping, probing for hollow spots or weaknesses. The wood, though aged, felt unyieldingly solid. No fissures, no rodent tunnels. Armed with a screwdriver, I attempted to pry loose a corner of the back panel, hoping to glimpse whatever lay behind. But the nails, fused by rust, held fast. The panel refused to yield, without risking significant damage. It wasn't my property to dismantle. Alone with the silence and my fraying nerves that afternoon, The memory of the nocturnal rapping felt more potent than ever. That night, around 11, a steady thump, thump, thump resonated from the closet. Louder now, more insistent, like knuckles applied with purpose. 3 beats, a pause, 3 more. My pulse leaped. Heat flared in my face, a faint tremor starting in my legs. I moved to the door, palm resting flat against the wood, feeling the faint vibration. The rhythm continued, gentle yet firm. Sweat trickled down my spine. In a single, decisive motion, I flung the door open, flashlight beam stabbing into the void. Only wood met my gaze. I stepped back, but left the door ajar this time. A heavy silence descended, thick and watchful. The air remained neutral, neither cold nor warm. I stood there for a long minute, listening, my own breathing unnaturally loud in my ears. Finally, tentatively, I reached in and tapped the inside wall of the closet. Silence. I tapped again. Nothing stirred. I slept with the closet door yawning open that night. A desperate gambit. Perhaps I could witness the phenomenon, catch something in the act. Lights extinguished, I retreated to bed, eyes straining to penetrate the gloom. Every shadow writhed with imagined menace. Hours crawled by as I waited, hyper alert for the familiar summons. Eventually, exhaustion dragged me under. Morning arrived with sunlight slanting across the floor, the closet gaping silently. That final month in the townhouse felt like wading through molasses. Each evening followed a lonely script. Return from work, microwave solitary dinner, lose myself in the television's flickering light, perpetually poised on the edge of apprehension. The vast, empty house amplified every incidental sound. A clang from the pipes would send me bolting upright, convinced the source was that closet. I took to sleeping with a small lamp burning, a fragile ward against the dark. Earplugs were intolerable. The thought of being deaf to my surroundings was worse than the noise itself, and the knocks never truly ceased. Some nights, mere whispers, others, bold pronouncements. Once, they roused me near 4 a.m., banishing sleep entirely. I lay staring at the ceiling, waiting for dawn. Towards the month's end, my landlord informed me a new tenant was interested. He offered an early release from my lease, an escape hatch I readily accepted. Packing became a frantic ritual. Friends were summoned, boxes wrestled into a small moving truck. On my last night, I lay alone in the denuded bedroom, my sleeping bag a thin barrier against the bare floorboards. The bed frame was gone. The closet stood utterly vacant, documents and suitcases already transported. Perhaps now, I reasoned, with nothing left inside, the sounds would finally cease. But around midnight, soft as falling dust, a single tap echoed from within its empty space. It resonated oddly in the barren room. My heart gave a familiar lurch, but this time, I didn't rise. I simply stared at the closed door for a long, indeterminate time. The next morning, I left the keys gleaming on the kitchen counter. One final ascent, one last look into the vacant bedroom. The closet door was shut tight. The house held its breath, silent. Unease remained, a cold stone in my gut, but it was dwarfed by an immense, liberating relief. I locked the door behind me and drove away without looking back. My new apartment is compact, unremarkable, blessedly quiet. It boasts a simple bedroom, a functional kitchen, and crucially, no built-in closets harboring secrets. The knocking hasn't followed me here, yet sometimes, in the deep stillness of the night, the memory surfaces, the rhythmic tapping, the phantom chill, the taut wire of fear that hummed in my chest whenever I stood before that door. I possess no explanation, only the remembered sensations, the visceral certainty of the experience. I'm profoundly glad I no longer reside there. That is the sum of it. It was a disquieting chapter, one I have no desire to revisit. The old timbers groan, a language I'd learned to ignore, the common parlance of settling bones and shifting weather. Houses breathe, they settle. That was the pact. But the dialogue shifted some time ago, originating from the dust-choked space beneath the roof. Up there, under the low-slung rafters, something else has joined the conversation. I see no specter in the gloom, no cascade of disturbed dust motes. Only this, a subtle resonance through the floor planks when I venture aloft, a tremor answering my tread, as if the boards displace themselves around another weight, step for mirroring step. Solitude defined my existence within these four walls, a two-story structure crowned by its dormant attic. Above, the attic slumbered, a repository packed tight with a forgotten cargo of previous lives and my own accumulating past. Necessity rarely called me to its threshold. The space served primarily as a buffer, its insulation a shield against the region's biting cold, a pragmatic function I'd understood since taking possession years prior. It was a cramped, airless realm, thick with the scent of decay and neglect, unworthy of exploration, until the day my own life downstairs began to overflow. Boxes crammed with the artifacts of defunct careers, stacks of unread books, cast-off garments, the ghosts of electronics past. They demanded a reckoning, a final resting place. Organization beckoned, purge the unnecessary, perhaps salvage a few relics for donation, impose order on the chaos. That afternoon, the folding stairs groaned their protest as I ascended into the attic's stale embrace. The air hung thick, a palpable entity tasting of aged wood and particulate matter. A lone, bare bulb cast a jaundiced eye over the cramped domain, revealing low rafters like ancient ribs and cobwebs draping the corners like funereal bunting. I began the excavation, sorting through cardboard tombs filled with brittle magazines, fossilized receipts, tangled nests of useless cables, the fractured limbs of furniture, long discarded. Behind a teetering ziggurat of boxes nestled against the far wall, I unearthed an anomaly. Structures of dark, dense timber. Unlike the attic's other bones, they formed partial partitions, strange skeletal frames that served no apparent purpose, their wood bearing the patina of significant age, far older than the surrounding construction. No nails or screws were visible. They seemed fitted together with archaic joinery, a forgotten geometry. Donning gloves, I tested one upright. It stood firm, emitting only a low groan under pressure. An architectural riddle, I noted, then dismissed, turning back to the task at hand. After an hour or two, choked by the dust and weary, I hauled down sacks bulging with refuse, leaving the enigmatic timbers to their silent watch. Sleep offered little sanctuary that night. From the depths of unconsciousness, I surfaced to a subtle percussion from above, not the random complaint of old wood, but something more deliberate. A faint squeak, a pause, then its echo. Squeak, pause, squeak. like hesitant footfalls. My mind offered platitudes, an old house, settling bones, the wind's persuasion. Yet a deeper instinct recoiled. The rhythm ceased after a minute, and I drifted back into uneasy slumber. The next day drew me back, armed with marker, tape, and notebook, intent on labeling the survivors of the purge. As I moved among the boxes, a peculiar sensation registered through the soles of my boots, a faint, sympathetic thrumming in the planks. It felt uncannily like another presence pacing nearby, mirroring my movements, but displaced, elsewhere on the floor. Paranoia, I reasoned, seeded by the nocturnal disturbances, but the vibration persisted, a low-level tremor accompanying my every step. I knelt, pressing my palm flat against the dusty wood, searching for cracks, for any sign of instability. Nothing visible. Yet, as I rose, a soft complaint of timber sounded just behind me. Quiet, almost sibilant, perfectly timed with my shift in weight. I spun around. Only stacked boxes and the dark, impassive wooden frames met my gaze. I took a cautious step towards the rear wall. A reciprocal creak emanated from the opposite side of the small space. I shifted left. The sound ghosted right. Holding my breath, heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs, I listened. The confined space offered no room for pursuit. I stood utterly still. The responsive creaking stopped. A cold dread traced its way up my spine. Settling wood is one thing. Wood that mimics your movement, that falls silent when you do, is another matter entirely. Forcing a semblance of calm, I resumed labeling, my thoughts scrambling for anchors, peculiar acoustics, perhaps, or the scuttling passage of some nocturnal creature, a raccoon or squirrel. But the dust lay undisturbed. No gnawed wood, no telltale scat. The attic held its breath, quiet save for this responsiveness that awakened only when I moved. After perhaps 40 minutes, the oppressive awareness became unbearable. I retreated down the groaning stairs, securing the hatch firmly behind me, and collapsed into a living room chair, striving to reclaim normalcy. Errands, cooking, the flickering distraction of television. For a while, I managed to forget, but that night, as I lay cocooned in blankets, the ceiling whispered again. Not random groans, but deliberate, measured pressures directly overhead, like soft, slow footfalls. Sleep became a fortress under siege. Morning found me resolved to confront the absurd. One final ascent, I promised myself, to seek tangible proof. Pest infestation, loose floorboards, structural faults, anything. Pulling down the ladder, the familiar miasma of old wood and dust greeted me. The single bulb overhead seemed weaker, sputtering fitfully as I tugged its chain, painting the gloom in sickly amber. I swept the floor with my gaze. Everything remained as I'd left it. The same monuments of boxes, the same brooding wooden structures against the back wall. I paced the perimeter, flashlight beam dissecting shadows, probing corners and crevices. No holes, no droppings, nothing to betray an animal presence. I stamped experimentally on various sections. The boards felt solid, protesting only with that familiar muted creak. Again, drawn by an uneasy curiosity, I approached the dark timber frames. I grasped one of the uprights, pulling, testing its solidity. It refused to yield. Tapping it produced a dull, solid thud. As I began to turn away, the vibration returned, a low hum resonating through the soles of my shoes. I pivoted sharply, flashlight beam cutting through the dusty air. No visible movement, but with my next step, a faint squeak answered from a different corner. Then another, with another step. It felt as though something unseen were circling me. My stomach clenched, muscles tightened across my shoulders. The fine hairs on my arms prickled. Keep calm, I told myself, but my breathing grew shallow. A test. I stood perfectly still, mastering my breath. Silence. Then, one deliberate, long step forward. The attic answered, a slow, protesting creak from the floorboards. Behind me. I jerked around, beam stabbing the empty space. Nothing. I took a step sideways. Another squeak whispered from behind one of the timber supports. I walked in a slow circle, and the disembodied sound shadowed me, maintaining its distance, an unseen orbit. Sweat slicked my palm, an invisible presence pacing in perfect synchronicity. Panic tightened its fist around my chest. I had to leave, yet a morbid compulsion held me fast. I knelt again, pressing my palm flat against the dusty planks. A faint tremor answered, a single, soft pulse against my skin. Then stillness. My heart hammered. Scrambling upright, legs unsteady, mouth dry, I forced myself toward the ladder, descending with clumsy haste, pulling the structure upward, sealing the hatch with trembling hands. In the hallway below, I stood listening, gasping for breath. The house was silent once more. Weeks bled into months. The attic remains a sealed territory, its hatch firmly locked. Logically, I know I own this house, that maintenance is required, but the thought of ascending those stairs chills me. Passing beneath the hatch in the hallway, I sometimes fancy I feel a subtle shift in the plaster overhead, a faint vibration transmitted downwards. I ignore it. At night, the occasional soft creak drifts down, and my mind instantly returns to that dusty space. Rationality still whispers possibilities, settling timbers, drafts, elusive pests hidden within the walls. But the memory of that synchronized pacing, that responsive tremor beneath my feet, refutes all mundane explanations. It defies logic, yet persists in feeling, in the undeniable reality of the experience. I still live here. I sleep, albeit fitfully at times, in the room below. I haven't touched those strange wooden dividers again, nor attempted to peer into the darkness behind them. Perhaps I disturbed something quiescent, awakened a presence bound to that specific space by moving things untouched for decades. I cannot say. I have no proof, no tangible evidence, only the testimony of my senses, the sounds that mimic my movements, the vibrations that answer my presence. It isn't loud, it doesn't rattle the house or follow me downstairs, but it's there, waiting, pacing in the dark whenever I dare to enter its domain. So, the door stays shut. Pretending everything is normal is the easier path. If something wants that attic, it can have it. I harbor no illusions of reclaiming it anytime soon. Belief in ghosts feels irrelevant. Something resides in my attic, and it moves when I move. That knowledge is a quiet weight, born in the solitude of these walls, an uneasy cohabitation, the price, perhaps, of dwelling within old bones. At least it stays confined. I keep my distance. For now, that is all I can do. Lock the door and listen to the house breathe its secrets around me. The road had hypnotized me, miles dissolving into a monotonous drone under the tires, leaving my eyes feeling scraped raw by the endless dark ribbon of asphalt. Exhaustion wasn't just settling in, it was claiming territory, bone deep. Then, like a derelict ship surfacing from a forgotten sea, the motel materialized beside the highway. Its sign flickered with a desperate, buzzing neon, casting a sickly glow. Decrepit, undoubtedly, but sanctuary was all that mattered. A horizontal surface, an escape from the relentless forward motion. I cut the engine, the sudden silence profound, and pushed myself out into the cool night air. The lobby was a cramped box, smelling faintly of stale smoke and disinfectant, utterly still, save for the gaunt figure hunched behind a scarred counter. He offered no greeting, merely regarded me with eyes that seemed lost in the shadows beneath his brow. A key slid across the counter, accompanied by a low murmur about departure times, before his attention retreated back to the unseen task occupying him. No matter. The room was my only destination. Down a corridor that felt unnervingly long, like the gullet of some sleeping beast, I found my door. It faced a vacant expanse of cracked asphalt, presided over by a solitary sentinel street lamp, weeping weak, jaundiced light. The key turned with a reluctant click. I slipped inside, the tumblers rasping shut behind me, sealing me in. Barely adequate, the room. A bed sagged slightly in the middle, a scarred dresser listed against one wall. A television clung precariously to a bracket. Wallpaper, patterned with faded, indeterminate flora, curled away at the seams, revealing glimpses of darker plaster beneath. A chemical tang hung in the air, failing to entirely mask something older, fainter. Still, it was a haven. My duffel landed with a soft thud. Shoes kicked off. I inhaled deeply, the tension in my shoulders easing fractionally. Release, finally. The grime of the journey clung to my skin, a sticky film demanding ablution. I sought the bathroom. Flipping the switch provoked a hesitant stutter from the overhead light before it buzzed into grudging illumination. I twisted the chrome faucet for the shower, letting the pipes groan and shudder as water began its journey. And then I spied it, nestled in the plaster beside the sink, a perfect, diminutive orifice, no bigger than a pencil's diameter, yet drilled with unnerving precision. It seemed to pierce straight through into the adjacent void. Instinctively, I leaned closer, peering into the tiny darkness, an artifact of some forgotten repair, surely. A misplaced drill bit during a clumsy renovation, never bothered to be filled. Yet, the sheer neatness of it, the deliberate geometry, felt wrong. A prickle of disquiet traced its way up my spine. Shaking my head, dismissing the flicker of unease, I tore off a wad of tissue from the dispenser and firmly plugged the aperture. A makeshift patch, inadequate, but it hid the unsettling eye. The shower was brief, the spray barely warm, my mind preoccupied. That creeping sense of being unsettled, initially dismissed, now clung stubbornly. Back in the main room, clad in fresher clothes, but feeling no cleaner, I sought refuge in distraction. The television flared to life, cycling through channels of static and forgotten sitcoms. I settled on the latter, the canned laughter feeling hollow and distant. My gaze, however, kept snagging on the closed bathroom door, my thoughts orbiting that small, plugged hole like anxious moths. A sound, so faint I almost dismissed it as the building settling, a soft tap-tap against the wall, seeming to emanate from within the bathroom. I went utterly still, the cheap television dialogue fading into meaningless noise. My heart gave a sudden, hard thump against my ribs. Silence returned, thick and expectant. I strained, listening until my ears rang. Nothing but the motel's aged groans and the drone of the TV. Just nerves, I told myself. Road fatigue. Old pipes. Taking a ragged breath, I forced my shoulders to unclench, dragging my attention back to the flickering screen. Tap, tap. Louder this time. Sharper. A sliver of ice slid down my vertebrae. Logic warred with a primal urge to investigate. Reluctantly, compelled by a dread I couldn't name, I rose. The short walk to the bathroom felt miles long. I pushed a door open. The buzzing light seemed harsher now. Everything appeared unchanged, save for one crucial detail. The small cavity by the sink was empty. The tissue I jammed in there was gone, vanished, pulled through from the other side. A cold wave washed over me, my thoughts scattering. My pulse hammered, a frantic drumbeat in my ears. Trembling fingers fumbled for more tissue, cramming it into the hole with more force than necessary, pressing until my knuckles whitened. Nothing, I chanted silently, a useless mantra against the burgeoning certainty that I was not alone, that unseen eyes were fixed upon me through the thin partition. I retreated from the bathroom, pulling the door closed, but didn't dare turn the lock. Not yet. Perching on the edge of the sagging mattress, I kept vigil, my eyes locked on the plain white door, ears straining against the silence. Minutes stretched, taut as wire. Then, a new sound, a faint, dry, scratch. My breath hitched. The urge to ignore it, to curl up and pretend, was immense. But a morbid, insistent curiosity gnawed at me. Slowly, stiffly, I stood and returned to the threshold. Took a breath. Opened the door. Looked. The tissue was gone. Again. My stomach plummeted. The shaking in my hands intensified. I pressed my ear flat against the cool plaster, listening with desperate intensity for any betraying sound from the other side. Only silence answered, vast and terrifying. Backing away deliberately, I pulled the bathroom door shut, and this time twisted the lock. The click echoed too loudly in the small room. I returned to the bed, sinking onto the edge, trying to marshal my runaway thoughts. A prank? Faulty construction? The rationalizations felt paper-thin, ripped apart by the chilling sequence of events. Every creak of the floorboards, every distant rumble of a truck on the highway sounded amplified, menacing. The sensation of being observed was palpable now, a physical pressure on my skin. Someone or something was just beyond my perception, waiting. The television droned on, unnoticed. My gaze remained fixed on the locked bathroom door, my mind painting horrific scenarios. The impassive night clerk, a fellow guest with sinister intentions, or something less definable, more ancient. Fear coiled tight in my gut. Just as a fragile layer of self-reassurance began to form, it shattered. A sound, distinct and chillingly deliberate. A soft, rhythmic scratching, like fingernails being drawn slowly across the wall surface from within the bathroom. I sat bolt upright, adrenaline surging, my heart battering my ribs. Every instinct screamed not to go back, not to look. But the not knowing was its own torment. I rose, legs unsteady, and approached the door one last time. My hand, slick with sweat, trembled as it closed around the knob. Turning it, Pushing the door inward revealed the stark truth. The hole gaped open, a dark, unblinking eye in the wall. The tissue was gone. Air refused to enter my lungs. The pounding in my chest felt violent, unsustainable. I stumbled back, pulling the door shut, collapsing onto the bed, wrapping my arms around myself as if to hold my fracturing composure together. The feeling of being watched was absolute now, an oppressive weight. An unseen presence lurked, patient, aware of my fear, aware I knew about the hole. It felt like being cornered, stalked. My eyes stayed glued to the bathroom door, every muscle tensed, poised for flight. Would it try the hole? The door? The window? I was prey, trapped in the hunter's territory. The remainder of the night passed in a state of hypervigilant paralysis. Sleep was unthinkable. Every settling noise of the old building was a potential intrusion. Every shadow held a threat. Trapped, utterly alone, yet terrifyingly not. Something waited just inches away, separated only by thin plaster and a locked door, fully aware of my presence, my discovery, my terror. The first hint of gray dawn filtering through the grimy window pane was my signal. Scrambling, I snatched my duffel, wrenched open the room door, and fled down the silent corridor. No thought of checking out, no glance towards the lobby. Into the car, keys fumbled into the ignition, hands shaking violently on the steering wheel. I drove, flooring the accelerator, putting as much distance as possible between myself and that place. I didn't dare look in the rearview mirror. Only miles later, with the sun fully risen and the motel a receding nightmare, did my breathing begin to even out. The frantic hammering in my chest subside to a dull ache, but the feeling lingers, a cold residue of dread, the phantom sensation of unseen eyes. Roadside motels hold no allure now, only the echo of that night. Too real, too close, and a chilling certainty persists. Whatever watched me from the other side of that wall is still there, inhabiting the silence, waiting patiently for the next weary traveler to seek refuge in that room, to notice the small, perfect hole. And I shudder, wondering what might have transpired had I not fled with the dawn. There exist junctures, fleeting and profound, where the fabric of the mundane ripples, where the commonplace warps into the uncanny, and you recognize, with the certainty that chills the marrow, that you've slipped across some invisible demarcation into a realm governed by unfamiliar laws. Such was the sensation the instant I breached the entrance of the antiquated repository of books. It defied articulation, this feeling, at least initially, yet from the precise moment my foot crossed the worn threshold, the very air seemed altered, dense, with a held breath, as if the edifice itself were poised in anticipation. A wiser soul might have retreated then, but curiosity, that insidious lodestone, held me fast. I'd been traversing a hamlet forgotten by the main highways, returning from some tedious professional obligation when the structure snagged my attention. A venerable brick edifice secreted away on a cobbled side lane, almost camouflaged unless one possessed prior knowledge of its existence. The inscription above the portal was a ghost of lettering, bleached and softened by seasons uncounted, and the panes of glass wore a fine shroud of neglect. It projected an aura of profound disuse, a place likely unvisited for generations, Yet, an inexplicable magnetism emanated from it. Perhaps its quiet dignity resonated, or perhaps it was the lifelong bibliophile in me responding to the scent of decay and knowledge. Regardless, I found myself before its heavy door, palm flat against the cool wood, urging it inward. The hinges groaned a protracted lament as the door yielded, releasing an immediate, potent fragrance: aged paper, binding glue, lemon oil polish, a scent both nostalgic and deeply comforting. The interior mirrored the exterior's antiquity: towering shelves, burdened with volumes that appeared undisturbed for decades, stretched towards a shadowed ceiling. Illumination was sparse, provided by a scattering of shaded lamps that cast pools of warm amber light upon scarred reading tables. No custodian presided over the front desk. No fellow patrons haunted the aisles. Only a profound stillness reigned, punctuated solely by the silent testament of countless books. It was, in its own way, utterly perfect. Aimlessly, I drifted between the towering stacks, my fingertips ghosting along the leather and cloth spines. Many were ancient, their titles eroded by the passage of time and touch. Dust motes danced in the infrequent shafts of light, undisturbed. Some bindings bore the faded marks of checkout cards, suggesting decades, perhaps centuries, since they last saw the light of day beyond these walls. I sought nothing specific, allowing instinct to pilot me through this labyrinth of forgotten words. Eventually, my meandering led me to the library's furthest recess, a corner where the shelves climbed higher still, and the shadows pooled, thick and cool. The lamplight seemed hesitant to penetrate this domain. A prickling intuition warned me away. This section felt dissonant, somehow detached from the library's main body. Yet, I pressed onward, propelled by an undeniable sense that something awaited me there, nestled amongst the neglected lore. And then I perceived it, a solitary volume resting on a low shelf, wedged incongruously between two significantly larger tomes. It was diminutive, unassuming, clad in plain, stark black, devoid of any title on its spine. It struck me as an anomaly, almost as if misplaced by accident, or perhaps as if it fundamentally did not belong within these hallowed walls at all. I knelt, extending a hand towards it. As my fingers brushed the smooth, worn cover, an unexpected jolt, cold and sharp, traced its path up my arm. I paused, my hand hovering, a sudden reluctance warring with ingrained inquisitiveness. The latter inevitably prevailed. I drew the book free and rose, turning it over in my grasp. No title, no author, no clue whatsoever to its contents, just the simple, time-polished blackness of its cover. With a flick of my thumb, I opened it, half expecting blank parchment. Instead, a single line greeted me, inscribed in a precise, elegant cursive: "Do not read beyond this page." I blinked, rereading the script. This wasn't print. It was undeniably handwritten, deliberate, bearing the unmistakable weight of a warning. A small, disbelieving laugh escaped me. An eccentric beginning, certainly, perhaps some archaic jest, or a forgotten narrative device meant to pique interest. Thus, naturally, compelled by the prohibition itself, I turned the page. The subsequent few leaves were vacant, but as I continued to riffle through, more handwritten entries emerged sporadically, peculiar, cryptic fragments that offered no coherent narrative. "You are not solitary," one declared. "It observes," whispered another from the page. The further I progressed, the more unsettling the pronouncements became. "Retreat now," a later page implored, "before all is forfeit." A genuine shiver traced the length of my spine now, yet I found myself incapable of stopping. It felt as though each turned page drew me deeper into an enigma I couldn't fathom, the book itself exerting a subtle, irresistible pull. The ambient air seemed to acquire a distinct chill, and the golden lamplight perceptibly dimmed, as if the room itself were subtly transmogrifying in response to my reading. Then I arrived at the final inscribed page. It held but a single word, scrawled in that same distinctive hand: "Run." I stared, my pulse hammering against my ribs. The atmosphere in the library had grown oppressive, thick with an unseen pressure, the distinct sensation of being watched intensifying. I cast a glance around, suddenly acutely aware of the profound silence that had descended. The gentle creaks of old wood, the faint rustle of settling paper, all ambient sounds had utterly ceased, leaving a vacuum. That's when I heard it, an infinitesimal sound, like the barest exhalation of breath, originating from somewhere directly behind me. I froze, solid, my fingers clenching the edges of the small black book. The whisper repeated, soft, sibilant, scarcely more than a stirring of air, too faint to decipher words, yet undeniably present, intimate, as if its source stood mere inches away. With excruciating slowness, heart thundering, I pivoted. The library remained deserted, rows upon rows of silent books. I stood rooted for a long moment, attempting to regulate my breathing, rationalizing. Imagination, surely. The book, the bizarre messages, merely an elaborate, peculiar prank left by some long-departed eccentric. Yet the conviction that something was intrinsically wrong, that the library's emptiness was a facade, refused to dissipate. My gaze dropped to the book still clutched in my hands, the stark command, "Run," seeming to pulse on the page. My hands began to tremble. I snapped the cover shut and thrust the volume back onto its shelf with unnecessary force. Departure was imperative. Now, I turned and strode rapidly towards the entrance, my footfalls unnaturally loud in the crushing stillness. But as I reached the library's central space, the whisper sounded again, distinctly louder this time, closer. "Do not leave." I halted abruptly, breath snagged in my throat. The voice was immediate, right at my back, soft, yet terribly insistent. Again, I forced myself to turn, heart leaping frantically. And again, nothing. Only the silent sentinels of the bookshelves and the inadequate glow of the lamps. The air felt glacial now, the shadows at the periphery seeming to writhe, to coalesce, as if concealing observers just beyond the light's reach. My skin crawled with primal fear. Every nerve ending screamed for escape. I hesitated no longer. I fled. My shoes pounded a frantic rhythm on the polished floorboards as I sprinted for the door. The whisper pursued me, escalating in volume, acquiring a desperate edge, but I didn't falter. I slammed the door open and practically fell onto the pavement outside, the cool night air striking my face like a physical blow. I stood there, gulping air, heart galloping. Behind me, the library loomed, a dark, silent mass, its dusty windows like vacant sockets, observing my retreat. The whisper had vanished. The street was still, but the sensation of being watched lingered, potent and unnerving. I didn't risk a backward glance as I scrambled into my car and drove away, my hands unsteady on the wheel. I recounted the experience to no one, and I have never revisited that forgotten town. Yet sometimes, in the dead hours of the night, when the house settles into silence and the world outside is hushed, I hear it, that faint susurrus at the edge of hearing, a phantom echo in my mind, urging me not to leave, beckoning me back, and I am left to wonder, with a chill that never quite fades, what fate might have awaited had I chosen to stay. The passenger seat beside me emptied itself of the man I'd just picked up, and with that sudden vacuum, the ordinary fabric of my journey tore. One moment, a presence sodden and thankful. The next, sheer absence. But the true dread, the kind that chills the soul, was only just beginning its relentless approach. For down that ribbon of desolate highway, under the weeping sky, I would see him again, and again, and impossibly again. It had been a day bled thin by routine, leaving me hollowed out and yearning for the sanctuary of home. A ceaseless deluge had begun hours ago, smearing the world beyond the windscreen into impressionistic streaks of gray, transforming the familiar drive into a 3-hour immersion in melancholic isolation. 2 hours deep, adrift in the monotony of asphalt and rain, my headlights snagged on him, a solitary figure stark against the gloom, thumb angled hopefully towards the road, drenched to the bone. Picking up strangers wasn't my habit. Spectral whispers of maternal warnings echoed against the drumming rain. Yet, something in his posture, a study in sodden resignation, resonated with a hollow echo within my own solitude. Against all ingrained caution, I felt the car slowing, pulling onto the slick shoulder. "Destination?" I inquired, my voice tight, as he folded himself into the car, shedding rivulets onto the passenger seat's fabric. "Just a stretch further," he replied, the timbre surprisingly resonant for his lean build. "Grateful for the stop." A curt nod was my only response as I eased back onto the highway. Silence stretched between us, punctuated solely by the hypnotic sweep of the wipers and the percussive rhythm of rain tattooing the roof. "Arthur," I offered finally, glancing sideways, a small token against the oppressive quiet. The syllable caught, snagged on the sudden, impossible emptiness beside me. My foot slammed the brake. The car slewed precariously on the wet tarmac. Wildly, my eyes darted around the cabin, convinced madness had finally claimed me. Had I dreamt him? But no, the upholstery bore the dark bloom of his recent dampness. The safety belt remained clicked shut, a useless strap across a vacant space. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic prisoner demanding sense from the nonsensical. People don't simply evaporate. It defied the known world. A momentary lapse. I grasped. A brief doze. He must have slipped out, unnoticed. Even as the rationalization formed, it felt flimsy, untrue. No slumber had claimed me, and no silent, swift exit from a moving car, seatbelt fastened, was conceivable. Shaken, knuckles bleached white on the steering wheel, I coaxed the car forward again, and then I saw him, looming out of the watery veil ahead, perhaps 100 yards distant. The same man, identical rain-plastered clothes, the same pleading thumb hooking the rain-filled air. I blinked furiously, scrubbing my eyes, certain of illusion. But as the distance closed, doubt dissolved. It was unequivocally him. My foot pressed down, a reflexive flight, the car surging past. In the rearview mirror, his form dwindled, an unmoving punctuation mark in the downpour. Relief warred with a dizzying sense of unreality. Had fatigue conjured this elaborate phantom? But then, impossibly, further on, an echo made manifest. There he stood, again. This time, compelled by some force outside my own volition, I decelerated. His eyes met mine as I drew level, and I could have sworn a flicker of shared knowledge passed between us. Impossible. Need a lift? The question spilled out, unbidden, a ventriloquist trick played on my own vocal cords. He nodded, the ritual repeating. He settled in, water darkening the already damp seat. Thanks, came the familiar deep voice. Rough night to be on foot. My mouth opened, to question, to demand, to scream, but when my gaze flicked to the passenger side, only emptiness greeted it. Again, the seatbelt hung loose this time, unfastened. A cold sweat beaded on my brow. This wasn't happening. It fractured logic, shattered reason. I jammed the accelerator, desperate to outrun this looping nightmare. Speed offered no sanctuary. Every few miles, the apparition returned, sometimes flanking the left shoulder, sometimes the right. Always the same figure, perpetually soaked, eternally waiting. The count became meaningless. 10 sightings blurred into 20, then dissolved into a nauseating infinity. A sliver of me craved confrontation, demanded understanding, but the larger part, governed by raw animal fear, just kept driving, fleeing the inexplicable. As the night deepened, the phenomenon mutated. Glancing sideways, I'd sometimes find him there, beside me, staring impassively ahead, a spectral co-pilot utterly ignoring my mounting hysteria. Other moments, the rearview mirror framed him, seated silently in the back. Once, a scream lodging tight in my throat, a horrified glance at the wing mirror revealed him running alongside the car, keeping pace with effortless grace as the speedometer climbed towards 90, his face a pale, rain-streaked blur against the hurtling landscape. I fought the encroaching madness. Pinched flesh raised stinging welts. Cold water splashed from a bottle at a desolate, flickering gas station offered only fleeting clarity. A self-inflicted slap cracked sharply in the enclosed space. Nothing deterred the phantom. He remained, woven into the very fabric of the storm-lashed night, an inescapable motif. Dawn bruised the eastern horizon, painting the bruised clouds in shades of lilac and dread. The exit sign bloomed ahead. My exit. Never had simple lettering seemed so profoundly like salvation. I took the ramp, my entire frame vibrating with accumulated exhaustion and terror. Pulling into my own driveway felt like surfacing from unimaginable depths. Silence descended, thick and expectant. I sat, engine ticking, paralyzed by the fear of looking, of finding him still present. Finally, drawing a ragged breath that hitched in my chest, I scanned the interior. Empty. The street outside lay quiet, mundane, blessedly normal under the softening rain. Legs like unreliable stilts carried me towards my front door. A scuff of sound on wet pavement spun me around, dread pooling, cold and heavy, in my gut. He stood at the end of the driveway, but the aspect had shifted. He was smiling, a faint, knowing curve of the lips. "Appreciate the ride," his voice carried, unnervingly clear despite the distance. "Until next time." And then, as I stood transfixed, he dissolved, not vanishing abruptly, but thinning, attenuating, evaporating like steam rising into the cool morning air. I remained there a long while, key clutched tight, staring at the empty space where he had been, my mind strained, attempting to knit the shredded edges of reality back together. Insanity? A waking dream? Deep down, a chilling conviction resonated. It had been real. The hitchhiker, the impossible recurrences, the defiance of physical law. Real. A fabricated illness kept me from work. The day was lost to fitful, haunted sleep, punctuated by visions of a thumb extended in the rain. A week has now elapsed. The car sits untouched, a metal shell holding the chilling echo of that night. Reason scrabbles for purchase and finds none. Only the stark awareness that something fractured the known world on that drenched highway. And the terror hasn't subsided because it feels unfinished. Every so often, a flicker in the periphery, a shape half glimpsed across the street. Him, waiting, watching, and I know, with a certainty that freezes the marrow, that eventually I'll have to drive that road again. When I do, he will be there, thumb outstretched, sodden, ready for another ride. What is he? Spectre? Demon? Some cosmic feedback loop? I possess no answers, only the chilling knowledge of his existence and our inexplicable bond forged in the heart of the storm. So, traveler, if you find yourself on a lonely highway when the heavens weep and a figure seeks passage from the rain, keep driving. Lock your doors. Avert your gaze, because some invitations, once accepted, bind you to a journey without end, a ride etched forever onto the landscape of your deepest fear. Sleep shattered, leaving Silas gasping in a film of his own cold sweat, heart hammering a frantic tattoo against the cage of his ribs. The first visitation, he'd rationalized it away, a phantom born of overwork, a fleeting specter of stress. But its nightly return, insistent and draining, whispered a truth far more unsettling. Fear was only the surface. Beneath it lay an encroaching exhaustion, a profound weariness that sleep refused to mend. Thus began the erosion. He inhabited a small house tethered loosely to the city's edge, a solitary existence marked by routine. Days were spent grease-stained and methodical in a maintenance shop. Evenings dissolved into solitary meals and the flicker of meaningless screens before succumbing to slumber. An unremarkable life until the shadow seeped into his dreams. That inaugural night remains etched sharp, a corridor unfurling into darkness, stone walls slick with perpetual weeping, the air thick as grave dust. His breath hitched, shallow clouds in the oppressive chill. Ahead, barely discernible, a form coalesced, draped in fabric dark as pitch, a cowl swallowing its features. It didn't walk, but flowed, a silent drift across the unseen floor. No rustle, no footfall, merely unnerving, liquid motion. A scream clawed at his throat, voiceless, trapped behind a wall of icy constriction. Then, erupted back into the waking world, lungs burning for air. Morning revealed the theft of hours. Limbs heavy, eyes stinging, he pushed the phantom back, blaming a half-remembered documentary. He wrestled through the day. The second night, the dreamscape reformed, the damp passage, the suffocating air. This time, the figure hovered closer. A fleeting glimpse beneath the cowl seared itself into his mind. Abyssal hollows, where eyes should be, skin stretched taut over sharp angles of bone. It performed a slow, deliberate gesture near his chest, like scooping unseen motes from the air. His heart seized, a frantic bird beating against its confines. He woke coughing, throat raw, breath ragged for long moments. Out of bed, Silas paced the confines of his room, a dull throb pulsing behind his temples, a peculiar weight settling deep within his chest. The ghost of breath held too long. In the bathroom mirror, his reflection stared back, bruised with sleeplessness, hair plastered damply to his brow. Cold water did little to quell the clammy tremor in his skin, the unsteadiness of his hands. Stress, he told himself again. Just stress. He retreated to bed, finding only fragmented, restless oblivion. By week's end, the lie of normalcy crumbled. The dream, a nightly sacrament, intensified with each repetition, the figure's presence gaining substance. Waking became synonymous with depletion. He nearly succumbed to sleep mid-shower. Another afternoon found him jolting awake in his car during lunch, the steering wheel imprinted on his cheek. Colleagues remarked on his pallor, his distracted air. Insomnia, he mumbled, a half-truth offered to deflect concern, unwilling to voice the terror that bloomed only behind closed eyelids, unwilling to sound unhinged. Then came the pouches. The first materialized near the front door, nestled against the skirting board, a small sachet of coarse, night-black weave, cinched with thin cord. Curiosity warring with instinct, he picked it up. A coldness radiated into his palm, sharp and biting like impacted snow, though the fabric itself was dry. As he loosened the drawstring, a puff of frigid air brushed his face, carrying on it the faintest exhalation, a dry, sibilant whisper that raised the hairs on his neck. He couldn't decipher the sound, yet it resonated with primal dread. He dropped the pouch. It skittered under a chair. Heart thudding, breath unsteady, he eventually retrieved it using a towel, burying it in a box deep within the closet, a problem deferred. The following day, another rested on his kitchen counter. Identical fabric, identical size, identical penetrating chill. Touching it sent his pulse leaping, heat flushing his cheeks as a knot tightened in his gut. Logic offered no solace. His home was secured nightly. No prankster held a key. Yet these objects manifested insistent tokens. Subtle variations emerged. One bore a faded sigil like 3 intersecting lines. Another, a darker stain blooming near its base. Each time he yielded to the morbid urge to open one, the icy gust escaped, accompanied by that fleeting, desiccated whisper. A second, perhaps 2, of captured sound. Concurrently, the dreamscape warped. The corridor bled into a vast, cavernous chamber. There, the figure stood sentinel, gathering faint, shimmering wisps from the stagnant air. With every inhalation Silas took in the dream, his own chest felt increasingly hollow. Sometimes, behind the figure, he glimpsed his own reflection, eyes sunken, face gaunt. The entity would drift nearer, extending those skeletal fingers. He'd invariably wrench himself awake, drenched, the frantic drumming in his ears echoing the void in his chest. Muscles screamed. Thoughts swam through sludge. Answers became imperative. He plunged into the digital abyss, searching for shadowed figures in dreams, for cold emanating pouches, for anything mirroring his descent. Most results led to fiction, to myth. Hours blurred into a tapestry of shadow people, incubi, obscure folklore. Then, buried deep within an esoteric forum, a single phrase snagged his attention. The collector of sighs. A threadbare post recounted an archaic tale, a being of shadow, feeding on human despair, traversing worlds, infiltrating dreams to harvest fear, pain, anxiety. The more potent the host's distress, the stronger its parasitic grip. Details were scant, comments unhelpful, but the name resonated with chilling finality. The collector of sighs. He tried to dismiss it, yet the parallels mounted over the ensuing days. The forum mentioned small cloth talismans used by this entity to store distilled hopelessness. Talismans invariably cold, releasing trapped fear upon opening. A cold sweat beaded on his brow as he read, his chest tightening. Too specific, too close. Shutting the laptop, his hands trembled. Catching his breath felt like surfacing after a deep dive. Worry, however, proved a stubborn weed. Each night, the dream recurred. He witnessed the figure harvesting something from the air, something faintly luminous, drawing a thin vapor from the space occupied by his dream self's chest. His own lungs would spasm, his throat burn. Exhaustion was the price of waking. Energy drinks became his crutch, fueling a jittery passage through workdays. He barked at his boss for expressing concern. A permanent tension seized his shoulders, radiating pain down his spine. More pouches surfaced, tucked beneath his bed, beside the bathroom sink, nestled near the living room couch. Each offered the same jolt of unnatural cold, the same brief, whispered exhalation when opened, sometimes a wheeze, sometimes a sharp gasp, never longer than a heartbeat, yet each instance sent adrenaline searing through him. He continued his grim collection in the closet's cardboard box, paralyzed by uncertainty. One evening, sleep ambushed him on the couch. The vast chamber materialized again, its walls weeping dark stains. The figure was there, but this time it turned its hooded head, fixing its unseen gaze upon him. A low hiss slithered through the dream air. His vision swam, his legs buckled. He collapsed to his knees in the dreamscape. As the figure stretched its hand toward him, a distinct pulling sensation emanated from his chest, as if unseen threads tugged at his very breath. Tears blurred his sight. His arms shook violently. With the desperate surge of will, he threw his body sideways. Consciousness returned abruptly. He was sprawled on the floor, cheek pressed to the carpet, gasping, sweat stinging his eyes. The thought of seeking help surfaced, then withered. Who would believe such a tale? He had no close confidants nearby, family distant. A doctor. "Excuse me, I think a dream demon is siphoning my vitality." Pills, perhaps therapy referrals, seemed the likely inadequate response. So, he continued his solitary research, devouring text on spirit lore, dream entities, warding techniques, rituals, chants, prayers vied with suggestions to starve the entity through positivity, through willful ignorance. But the fear was visceral. the exhaustion undeniable. He attempted mental fortifications before sleep, loud music, mindless videos, frantic cleaning, futile. The moment his eyes closed, the figure loomed in his mind's eye. He began to dread the inevitable surrender to unconsciousness. Even mundane moments became fraught. A flicker of dream memory at his work desk could trigger trembling hands, dropped tools, the persistent ache of emptiness in his sternum. Then, a chilling pattern emerged. The pouches didn't appear randomly. Their manifestation correlated with days steeped in anxiety, a stressful commute, a workplace conflict. These seemed to summon a new cold token onto a table, a chair. The collector, it seemed, fed directly on his turmoil, bottling fragments of his dread, and the whispers released from the pouches. He recognized them now. They were echoes of his own sharp, fearful intakes of breath from the dream. His nights devolved further. He fought sleep, forcing himself through repetitive shows until his eyes burned and thoughts fogged. Inevitably, usually around 3 a.m., oblivion claimed him. He'd wake hours later, slumped on the couch or at the kitchen table, plunged immediately back into profound fatigue, heart pounding its frantic alarm. His mouth felt like parchment, limbs weighted with lead. He took to murmuring reassurances to himself, desperate attempts at self-coaching. It's not real. It can't hurt me if I don't let it. Hollow words. The next descent into sleep brought the familiar corridor, the chamber, the waiting figure, its presence now feeling denser, more substantial. It would raise one of the dark pouches, decanting into it, a faint vapor drawn directly from his chest. His own breath would catch, stutter. He'd wake choking, gasping. In a surge of desperate action, he gathered the pouches from the closet box, stuffed them into a trash bag, and drove to a distant dumpster. He hurled the bag inside, slammed the heavy lid, and sped away, a fragile sense of relief washing over him. That night, he prayed for emptiness. The dream returned. In the morning, 2 new pouches lay accusingly on his bedside table. A strangled sound, half sob, half scream, tore from him. He kicked the bed frame, pacing, breath coming in ragged bursts. His legs felt like water, hands icy, a fine tremor vibrating through his chest. The terrible clarity struck him. His own dread was the key, the invitation. Each surge of anxiety, every wave of stress, widened the aperture through which it reached. The collector of sighs. The name was brutally literal. It thrived on his gasps, his fearful breathing, his exhausted exhalations of despair. Each pouch, a vessel for captured panic. Armed with this grim understanding, Silas attempted a different defense. Not hope, not positive thinking, but stoicism. He resolved not to panic when confronted by the figure. It was an exercise in sheer will. During the day, he practiced measured breathing, inhaling slowly, exhaling deliberately, consciously relaxing his body. At night, as the familiar dread signaled the dream's onset, he fought to maintain that control. He forced his jaw to unclench, kept his hands loose. The corridor still materialized, the walls still wept, the figure still waited. But when the cold hand reached, he focused solely on the rhythm of his breath, slow, steady. His heart hammered, yet he resisted the urge to gasp, or flinch. He simply observed the approaching dread. Across several nights, a subtle shift occurred. The exhaustion upon waking lessened, though it remained. The pouches ceased their proliferation. Only 2 or 3 more appeared, then none. His body remained taut with tension, but a sliver of strength returned each morning. In the dream, the corridor persisted, yet the figure no longer dominated the center. Sometimes it was merely a flicker at the periphery, a drifting shadow in the corner. The chill remained when it moved, but he held his breath steady. His chest felt tight, but the burning subsided. He is not free. Its presence lingers, a cold spot in his awareness, particularly as night deepens. A faint whisper sometimes seems to emanate from the closet corner where the box once sat. Fleetingly, a dark shape registers at the edge of his vision while he stands at the bathroom sink. His heart still leaps, but he battles the tide of panic. The absence of new pouches feels like a fragile victory. He harbors no illusions of complete understanding, only the certainty that terror is its sustenance. His sole recourse is composure. He won't feign calm. Flickering lights make him jump. A flashlight resides permanently by his bed. He no longer sleeps with the door fully closed, but he endures. He fights. He hopes that by denying the collector of sighs its gruesome nourishment, he can slowly, painstakingly starve it, push it back into whatever abyss spawned it. His body aches with the deficit of true rest. His vision sometimes blurs, and the chill still finds his skin in the lonely hours. Yet, he is not surrendering. Whether this presence will ever fully recede, or if it's now a permanent shadow cast upon his life, remains unknown. All he can do is regulate his fear, steady his breath. That is his battlefield, redrawn each time he closes his eyes. A brittle crack shattered the woodland hush, a twig succumbing beneath my boot. Motion ceased, breath caught. Something felt profoundly awry. Where moments before birdsong and the scurry of unseen creatures had woven a tapestry of sound, an unnerving quiet now reigned, thick and watchful. Eyes, I felt them, prickling along my spine from the shadowed interstices between ancient trees. In that instant, the realization struck cold. I wasn't merely disoriented. I was prey. Ilara, they call me, and I'd fancied myself seasoned in the ways of the wild, a veteran of lonely trails and challenging ascents. Pride, a foolish companion, had always walked with me, whispering of my knack for navigation through the remotest terrains. This time, however, hubris had led me blind. I had tragically misjudged the immensity of this forest, this sprawling, indifferent green, and inflated my own competence against its vastness. The day began under auspices of simple adventure, a new trail lauded online by fellow wanderers, demanding, yes, but the vistas repay the effort, they promised. Views that steal your breath. What remained unsaid was the treacherous ease with which the path could vanish, dissolving into the undergrowth for the unwary eye. Dawn saw me embark, pack laden with essentials, water, dense energy bars, the compact kit for survivals just in case. Hours unfolded as envisioned. The path coiled through deep woods, sunlight dappling the mossy floor, then suddenly yielding to panoramic revelations of distant haze-blue mountains. Vitality surged. a pure draught of clean air and physical striving. But the afternoon sun slanted lower, and the woods began to subtly shift their allegiance. Trail markers grew sparse, phantom-like, forcing hesitant pauses, second guesses that gnawed at certainty. My phone, a sleek rectangle of useless glass, offered no signal, no digital lifeline in this deep embrace of wilderness. The compass and paper map, relics of a tangible world, were potent tools rendered impotent by my ignorance of our precise coordinates upon the wrinkled page. As the chilling understanding, lost, solidified, a practiced calm warred with rising panic. Stay put. Make yourself seen. Wait. The survival mantras echoed, yet a deeper instinct screamed defiance. Remaining static felt like surrender. I had to move, to reclaim the thread back to the known world, and swiftly. Choosing a direction bore more of hope than cartography, I pressed onward. It was then the silence began its insidious creep, leaching the natural sounds until only the rasp of my own lungs and the rhythmic crunch of boots on leaf litter remained. Then, the aforementioned twig snap, the stark announcement of my presence, followed by that undeniable sensation, observation. My gaze swept the surrounding trees, a frantic search for movement, for the source of the unseen scrutiny. Nothing stirred, yet the feeling clung, an invisible shroud. Abandoning stealth, I quickened my pace, the sole imperative now being distance from the nameless watchers. Through tangled underbrush I hurried, glimpses flickering at the edge of sight, indistinct shapes flitting between trunks, always vanishing before focus could resolve them. A frantic percussion began in my chest. My hurried walk broke into a desperate run, branches lashing my face, the forest floor a treacherous obstacle course. Lungs burning, legs turning to stone, I finally collapsed against the broad, rough bark of an oak, gasping. And then I saw it, a structure, faint in the distance. Hope, sharp and sudden, pierced through the exhaustion. A ranger's station, a forgotten cabin, sanctuary, help. Closer approach transmuted hope to confusion, then curdled it into dread. Not one building, but an assemblage materialized through the trees, rough-hewn cabins, cobbled from logs and scavenged scraps, encircling a bare patch of earth like primitive teeth. It resembled some manner of settlement, yet utterly alien to any I knew. Caution warred with desperation. Every nerve shrieked retreat, but exhaustion pinned me. The encroaching dusk threatened, and this anomaly might represent my only chance. Initially, the hamlet seemed deserted. No tendrils of smoke curled skyward. No welcoming light gleamed from within the crude window openings. Yet stepping into the clearing revealed signs of recent habitation. The faint warmth radiating from a central fire pit. Fresh imprints stark in the damp earth. Someone or something had been here moments ago. Hello? The word emerged small, swallowed by the immense quiet. Is anyone here? I'm lost. I need assistance. Silence stretched, taut and unnerving. Then, like figures emerging from the very soil, people began to appear from the shadowed doorways. Men, women, clad in ragged garments stitched from disparate materials. Their skin bore the deep tan and lines of constant exposure. Hair hung long, untamed. But their eyes, it was their eyes that seized me with primal fear. wild, almost feral, glinting with a disturbing alloy of suspicion and a raw, unsettling hunger. They formed a loose cordon, maintaining distance, yet decisively cutting off any retreat. An older man, distinguished by a long, grizzled beard that flowed down his chest, stepped forward, his bearing suggesting authority. "You trespass, outsider," he rasped, his voice gravelly, as if pulled from disuse. "These woods reject your kind." I forced saliva down a constricted throat, striving for a steady tone. "My apologies. I became lost. I seek only the way back to the marked trail. If you could merely indicate the direction, I will trouble you no further." A laugh escaped him, harsh and devoid of mirth. "There is no back for you now. You have seen. You know." A low murmur rippled through the others. They shifted, drawing infinitesimally closer. An earthy, almost animal scent drifted from them, sharp and unfamiliar. "Please." Desperation now colored my voice, undeniable. "I will speak of this to no one. Your secret is safe. I only wish to return home." The leader subjected me to a long, penetrating scrutiny, his eyes seeming to bore directly into my soul. At last, he spoke again. "Your fate requires discussion. Dawn will bring counsel. Until then, you remain." Watched. Two powerfully built men gripped my arms, their fingers biting into flesh. They propelled me towards one of the smaller hovels, barely more than a shack, and thrust me inside. The rough-hewn door slammed shut. The heavy thud of a securing bar echoed ominously. Darkness enveloped me, thick with the smell of damp earth, mold, and something indefinably old. As my vision slowly adjusted, the faint moonlight filtering through cracks revealed a crude palette of straw and stiff animal hides. A small aperture served as a window, but it was densely interwoven with branches, permitting only slivers of illumination. I sank onto the pallet, mind churning. Who were these people? How long had this hidden existence persisted? And what intentions lay behind those watchful, hungry eyes? Sleep offered no refuge. The night pulsed with the settlement's muted life, muffled talk, the snap and crackle of unseen fires, and, disturbingly, intermittent sounds that resembled nothing so much as bestial howls carried on the breeze. With the first pale fingers of dawn probing the shack's interior, the door creaked open. The leader stood framed in the opening, flanked by the same two men. "Come," was all he said. They escorted me to the central clearing, now populated by the entire community. Dozens of eyes fixed upon me, a spectrum of curiosity, hostility, and something akin to resignation. The leader addressed the assembly, his voice carrying in the cool morning air. "For generations, we have dwelled within these woods, unseen, untouched by the outer world. Survival demanded isolation, the preservation of our ways. Your presence, outsider, jeopardizes all." I opened my mouth, a plea forming, but he raised a hand, silencing me. "Departure is impossible," he stated flatly. "Yet, disposal is not our custom. Therefore, a choice is offered. Remain, become woven into our tapestry, learn our life. Or," the word hung unfinished, the alternative starkly implied, "absolute." My thoughts raced, a frantic scramble for options. Stay? Sever all ties to my former existence, to everyone I knew and loved. Could I endure such exile? Images of family, friends, flashed with painful clarity. Would they ever know my fate? As if sensing the internal turmoil, the leader spoke again. The world beyond is a poisoned well. Avarice, decay, ceaseless destruction. Here, he gestured around the primitive circle. We exist in balance with the wild, taking only necessity. We are unbound. My gaze swept the faces surrounding me. Some nodded, affirming his stark philosophy. Others held expressions less certain, skepticism, perhaps even fear. It struck me then, not all here were voluntary adherents to this cloistered life. In that instant, a decision coalesced. I could not embrace this total severance, yet neither could I simply abandon these people, some clearly captive to circumstances as much as I was. I comprehend, I began, measuring each word. The sanctity of your life here is paramount. Yet, might there not exist a path between? A means to safeguard your seclusion while permitting limited contact for necessities, for aid, should illness strike. A ripple of murmurs passed through the crowd. The leader's eyes narrowed, but emboldened, I continued. I could be that path, a conduit between your world and the one I left. Your precise location need never be revealed, but I could facilitate the passage of essential goods, of news. In exchange, I offered the final crucial piece. Perhaps you could share your knowledge, your ways of living attuned to this forest. It felt audacious, a desperate gamble. Tension held the clearing captive. For a long moment, only the whisper of the wind in the high branches stirred. Then, slowly, deliberately, the leader inclined his head. You speak with unexpected wisdom, outsider. There may be more substance to you than first perceived. Your proposition warrants consideration. That exchange unfolded 3 months past. I navigate the real world once more, yet my life is now bifurcated. Regular journeys lead me back into the deep woods, carrying supplies, acting as a discreet emissary for the hidden folk. It is no perfect arrangement. Fragility underscores every interaction. Discovery, I know, feels inevitable, a matter of when, not if. But for this precarious present, I strive to shield their isolation while cautiously, selectively introducing elements from beyond that might serve them without shattering their world. The forest and its secrets have irrevocably altered me. I question the clamor and consumption of modern existence, finding profound value in the stark simplicity I witnessed. Yet, the perils of absolute seclusion, of severing oneself from the vast human tapestry, are equally vivid. Trekking now through these familiar woods, no longer lost, but forever changed, I often reflect on the precipice upon which I stood, how easily I might have vanished entirely, and I cannot help but wonder about others, unknown hikers across the years, who face the same choice when confronted by the silent, watchful people of the deep green, and perhaps chose differently. A peculiar density clung to the air within Mercy Ascendant Hospital's shadowed arteries, thicker than the usual nocturnal quiet. It carried the acrid tang of sterilization, yes, but laced beneath it, a cloying sweetness that coiled unpleasantly in the gut. My footfalls echoed too loudly on the polished linoleum as I navigated the wards, an inexplicable tremor tracing the line of my spine. Tonight felt porous, vulnerable, and I, adrift in its strange currents, had no inkling that this particular tide of darkness would soon pull me under, dragging me into a chasm where healing warped into something monstrous, blurring the fragile boundary between salvation and oblivion. Ilara Vance. That's the name stitched onto my scrubs, the identity I've worn patrolling these halls for 3 years under the reign of the moon. I'd catalogued the spectrum of human fragility, the shattering impacts, the improbable mending, the quiet surrenders, or so I believed. The tapestry of experience offered no thread, however, to brace me for the horror woven into the fabric of that specific night. The shift began under the banner of routine. Chart updates, medication rounds, the hushed ballet of tending to the slumbering or the restless. Mercy Ascendant breathed shallowly in these pre-dawn hours, populated by the spectral efficiency of the night crew. Having just soothed Mrs. Dubois in 503, my attention snagged on the unexpected closure of room 507. An anomaly. Doors remained ajar, silent sentinels allowing easy observation, unless privacy was explicitly invoked. No such request resided in my memory for this occupant. A low murmur seeped from beneath the door, one voice insistent, urgent, the other a mere filament of sound. My knuckles hovered inches from the wood. A primal whisper urged retreat, warned against disrupting unseen currents. Yet, the oath I'd taken, the ingrained reflex of care, propelled my hand forward. A soft rap, then the gentle pressure inwards. Is all well within? My voice, aiming for casual, felt brittle in the charged space. The tableau froze me. Dr. Alistair Finch, a surgeon whose reputation gleamed like his own polished instruments, loomed over the bed. Not in examination, no. His hand gripped a syringe, its contents shimmering with an unnatural opalescent light. He spun, his features a topography of shock quickly hardening into fury. Nurse Vance, your presence is unexpected. My own words tangled, throat tight, gaze locked on the syringe, then flicking to the patient. The voices, just ensuring patient comfort. Entirely under control, Finch retorted, the syringe vanishing behind his back with practiced speed. Mr. Croft was agitated, a mild sedative. But Silas Croft's eyes screamed a different narrative. Wide, stark white against his ashen face, they pleaded silently. His lips parted, a shape forming, yet no sound emerged. A tremor ran through the old man. "Doctor," I managed, the words slow, deliberate. "The contents of that syringe?" Finch's jaw tightened, his gaze turning glacial. "That falls outside your purview, nurse. I strongly advise you return to your duties immediately. Forget this intrusion." The menace was palpable, a cold weight pressing down. "Flee!" instinct shrieked. "Flee and forget." But the terror in Silas Croft's eyes anchored me. This was violation, stark and horrifying. "I cannot, doctor," I heard myself say. surprised at the resonant calm in my tone. "Put the syringe down, please. Step away from Mr. Croft." A flicker of something, acquiescence, crossed his face, instantly extinguished. He moved with a predator's explosive grace, not towards the door, but at me. A brutal shove sent me staggering, my hip colliding sharply with the bed frame. By the time I righted myself, gasping, Finch was a phantom, the door whispering shut in his wake. I spun back to the bed. "Mr. Croft, Silas, are you harmed?" His answer was a horrifying transformation. The whites of his eyes swallowed the blue, his body seized by violent, thrashing convulsions. Alarm shrieked into the sudden chaos, vital signs painting erratic, desperate patterns on the monitor. "Code Blue, room 507. The call ripped from my throat as instinct took over, hands finding the rhythm of chest compressions. The ensuing minutes dissolved into a maelstrom. The crash cart's clatter, shouted commands, the desperate choreography of resuscitation. We fought against an invisible tide, pulling Silas Croft under. It was futile. At 17 minutes before 4, the fight ended. Silence descended, heavy and accusatory, as the team dispersed, leaving me amidst the wreckage, the cooling body, the discarded wrappers, the lingering scent of ozone and despair. My thoughts fractured. What poison glittered in that syringe? Why would Finch, paragon of surgical skill, commit such an act? "Report it," the imperative screamed. But to whom? In a hierarchy where Finch resided near the apex, who remained untainted, who could be trusted with a truth this venomous? The following days, blurred, haunted by the ghost of Silas Croft and the icy stare of Alistair Finch, I moved through my shifts with a newly sharpened awareness, the hospital's familiar rhythms now dissonant, suspect, my senses tuned to the peripheral, furtive entries into rooms not on official rounds, conversations that evaporated upon my approach, the subtle but undeniable uptick in unexpected nocturnal deaths among the vulnerable, the aged, the chronically frail. A chilling pattern began to emerge from the static. Driven by a cold dread, I began my own clandestine audit. Hours stolen poring over digital charts, cross-referencing mortality statistics, even risking sorties into the archives after midnight's deepest hush. The data painted a terrifying picture, a sharp, statistically improbable spike in fatalities within specific patient demographics over the preceding year. Yet, no alarm sounded, no investigations launched. Instead, a meticulous campaign of obfuscation, death certificates subtly amended, patient histories selectively edited. The motive remained elusive, a grotesque puzzle, until a stray news report celebrating Mercy Ascendant's phenomenal success with organ transplantation, wait times slashed, lives ostensibly saved at record speed, struck me with the force of a physical blow. The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. They weren't just letting patients die. They were selecting them, harvesting organs from those deemed expendable, the elderly, the terminally ill, to expedite transplants for others. A monstrous calculus, playing deity in sterile scrubs. The knowledge was a corrosive acid in my gut. Action was imperative, exposure essential, but the architects of this horror wouldn't hesitate to eliminate a threat. They had killed already. Over a tense, sleepless week, I became a shadow collector. Digital copies secured, crucial pages photographed, even managing heart pounding to procure a minuscule sample of the iridescent fluid from a locked dispensary cabinet. Everything funneled onto encrypted drives, duplicates dispatched via secure mail to trusted confidants, bearing stark instructions should I disappear. Then, armed with proof and a volatile mix of fear and fury, I sought out Finch. I found him late one evening, bathed in the solitary glow of his office lamp, laying bare my knowledge, piece by damning piece. I watched the blood drain from his patrician face. "Vance, you cannot comprehend the necessity," he began, voice strained, pleading. "The lives saved outweigh. We rescue 3, sometimes 4, for everyone whose suffering we curtail. Viable lives, futures restored. Futures stolen." The words tore out, raw with disgust. "By what right do you make that choice? Your oath was to preserve life, not usurp it. Your butchers hiding behind scalpels." I declared my intention. The authorities, the full weight of the evidence. It was finished. For a fleeting instant, his eyes held something akin to defeat, a fatal misreading on my part. As I pivoted to depart, a searing sting erupted in my neck. Finch, impossibly fast, stood beside me, retracting a small syringe. The edges of my vision swam, dissolving into kaleidoscopic blurs. Through the encroaching fog, his face seemed etched with a strange, sorrowful resolve. "Forgive me, Elara." His voice was a low murmur, almost gentle. "The work is too vital. We cannot permit interference." Consciousness fragmented, then ceased. I surfaced 3 days later, adrift in the starched white anonymity of a different hospital bed, miles from Mercy Ascendant. The official narrative spoke of a sudden, severe anaphylactic shock triggered by workplace allergens. A neat fiction. I recognized the chilling reality, an attempt at erasure, silencing the witness. They thought me neutralized. But they had miscalculated my resilience. The encrypted drives found their destinations. The ensuing storm broke over Mercy Ascendant, investigations blooming into indictments, arrests shattering the hospital's celebrated facade. In the quiet aftermath, navigating the wreckage of my former reality, I often revisit the precipice of that night. How swiftly the known world fractured, how readily the noble path of healing could twist into its monstrous opposite under the banner of a corrupted greater good. I remain a nurse, the calling undimmed, but my gaze is sharper now, my trust harder won. I've learned that the deepest shadows can emanate from figures sworn to uphold the light, cloaked in the very authority meant to protect. Within the sanitized calm of hospital corridors, beneath the hum of life support, decisions unfold in the hushed hours, unseen conflicts rage. Most remain oblivious, but I carry the weight of that knowledge. I see the potential fault lines, and the fight to illuminate the darkness. That battle is far from over. The flicker of polished steel caught the dim light, a venomous spark in his grasp, and instantly, the architecture of my reality fractured. This wasn't negligence, not a showing soured by circumstance. It was a meticulously designed snare, and I, Elara Vance, had obligingly stepped onto the pressure plate. His gaze, glacial and devoid of human warmth, pinned me, and a sickening certainty crystallized. Escape from this vacant shell of a house was no longer a guarantee. The day had unfurled like countless others in my decade navigating the currents of property sales. Odd clientele, houses whispering secrets. These were familiar shoals. Nothing, however, had charted the course for this abyss. Dusk was painting the office windows violet when the phone shrilled. A man, his voice like stones, tumbling downhill, demanded an immediate viewing. Urgency wasn't novel. Serious buyers often moved with the tide. In this market, you didn't question a promising current. "Forgive the hour," he rasped, impatience threading his words. "But my time in town is fleeting. The old manor on Hawthorne Lane, the Gothic revival. I'm exceptionally keen. Your efforts will be compensated." Hesitation flickered. Beyond the glass, the sky bled into night. 7 o'clock had passed. Hawthorne Lane coiled at the town's frayed edge, a place steeped in isolation. Yet, the siren song of commission drowned the nascent tremor of unease. "Very well," I conceded. "Allow 30 minutes for travel. Will that suffice?" "Impeccable," he returned, a strange resonance beneath the surface, unreadable. "Until then." The drive itself became a descent into disquiet. Hawthorne Manor had lingered on the listings, a skeletal beauty shunned for its remoteness, and the persistent folklore clinging to its eaves like ivy, whispers of spectral residents. Daylight showings were one thing. Navigating its shadowed halls by twilight felt like tempting fate. My headlights carved through the encroaching gloom, finally illuminating the manor as the last vestiges of sunset surrendered. It loomed, a silhouette against the bruised sky, its windows vacant sockets staring into the void. A shiver traced my spine as I killed the engine. Silence. No other vehicle disturbed the gravel drive. My watch confirmed my punctuality. Perhaps he was delayed. Keys cold in my hand, I positioned myself near the imposing front door. Minutes stretched, elastic and tense. 5 became 10. Just as retreat began to beckon, a shape detached itself from the deeper shadows flanking the house. Tall, swathed in black, his features lost beneath a hat's brim. "Mr. Silas?" I ventured, recalling the name given over the wire. A nod. He drew nearer. "My apologies. The grounds are captivating." His voice had shed its earlier gravel, softening to a near whisper, yet an unnerving counter-melody played beneath it, plucking at my nerves. I wrestled the feeling down. Business as usual. A practiced smile stretched my lips as I turned the key. "Shall we explore?" Inside, the house exhaled decay and silence. Footfalls resonated unnaturally in the cavernous rooms, specters conjured by the beam of my torchlight. I launched into the familiar litany of period details, forcing enthusiasm into the stale air. Mr. Silas trailed, a wraith-like presence, offering no comment, no inquiry. His utter passivity was atypical, yet I rationalized it. The late hour, perhaps preoccupation, and forged ahead. The rupture occurred on the second floor, within the vast master suite. Mid-sentence, extolling the virtues of the original parquetry, I sensed the void behind me. I spun, the torch beam slicing through the dark, finding him stationed by the entrance, the door now resolutely shut. "Mr. Silas?" The question trembled, betraying me. Is everything satisfactory? A smile bloomed on his face then, a rictus utterly devoid of warmth, turning my veins to conduits of ice. Oh, entirely. Though I fear a slight misapprehension has occurred. You see, acquiring this property was never my intention. My pulse became a frantic drum against my ribs. I fail to grasp your meaning. Why are we here? He advanced a single step, and the light snagged it again, the lethal shimmer of a blade angled in his hand. We are here because this is the designated place, the place for your cessation. Terror, absolute and paralyzing, seized me as the situation's full horror detonated. Isolated, empty house, a predator. No one knew my precise location. The trap sprung. My thoughts scattered, desperately seeking an egress. The window. Too high, likely fused shut by decades of paint and neglect. The door. He stood sentinel, retreating instinctively, my gaze locked on the knife. Please, the word stumbled out. This isn't necessary. I won't speak of this. Just permit me to leave. Laughter echoed, sharp and chilling in the hollow space. Ah, but I'm afraid it is quite necessary. You comprehend, you're merely one in a sequence. Nothing personal, understand? You are simply available. He stalked forward, deliberate, a cat savoring the mouse's final moments. My retreat ended abruptly against the cold plaster of the far wall, cornered. In that stark confrontation, facing oblivion in his eyes, my life didn't spool out in cinematic montage. Instead, regret flooded the space. Regret for dismissing intuition, for venturing into this forsaken place after dark, for letting ambition blind me to every crimson flag waving frantically in my periphery. Yet, beneath the suffocating layers of fear and remorse, defiance flickered, a stubborn ember refusing to be extinguished. I would not perish. Not here. Not like this. As the knife ascended, the world seemed to decelerate. An opening materialized in the slowed frame. I surged forward, driving my shoulder into his sternum. The unexpected impact sent him staggering, surprise momentarily eclipsing the malice in his eyes. A metallic clatter echoed as the knife skittered across the floorboards. I scrambled past him, wrenched the door handle, and plunged into the corridor, running as if pursued by damnation itself. My shoes hammered the staircase, breath tearing raggedly from my lungs. Behind me, his heavier footfalls pursued, his own breathing harsh. Reaching the grand foyer, I grappled with the front door's ancient lock, panic rendering my fingers useless. Just as the mechanism yielded with a groan, his hand clamped onto my forearm like a vice. A scream tore through the night's stillness as I fought with primal ferocity. My elbow found purchase, yielding flesh, perhaps his midriff, and his grip faltered just enough. Freedom. I burst into the cool night air, not risking a backward glance. My car sat yards away, a mundane sanctuary in the oppressive dark. Reaching it, keys rattling in my violently trembling hand, I fumbled with the lock. As the door finally swung open and I hurled myself inside, a fleeting glimpse in the rearview mirror captured him, standing silhouetted on the porch, observing my flight. Tires screamed on gravel as I fled, accelerating into the darkness. Only the sterile lights of the police station finally convinced me to ease off the accelerator, heart hammering against my ribs, tears tracing hot paths down my face. What followed dissolved into a haze of procedural numbness, sworn statements, forensic teams combing the manor. They unearthed its secrets, concealed chambers, instruments of torment, grim keepsakes from souls extinguished before mine. Mr. Silas, unmasked as Victor Martel, had consecrated derelict properties into charnel houses for years, preying on the trust inherent in my profession. 2 weeks later, attempting the same ruse in a neighboring county, his reign ended. Confronted with his mugshot for identification, a phantom chill traversed my spine. The face from my nightmares was contained, yet the psychic imprint of that night remained indelible. My career in real estate dissolved soon after. The prospect of entering another vacant dwelling, of solitary confinement with a stranger in some secluded corner, was unbearable. A decade's work incinerated in a single night of terror. But now, ensconced in a vibrant city enclave, far from isolated lanes and whispering manners, the rightness of that choice is undeniable. I'm counted among the fortunate, a survivor, and each sunrise feels like a benediction, a second chance hard won. Sometimes, a for sale placard, or the sight of an agent ushering clients across a threshold, sparks an urge to cry out, to warn of the shadows that can gather behind unlocked doors, of the predators who twist professional faith into a weapon. But the warning often feels futile. Who anticipates a routine showing metastasizing into a struggle for life itself? So, my voice finds a different channel. I advocate for vigilance within the industry, speaking at forums, penning cautionary articles, any conduit to heighten awareness. Because while my narrative found its improbable, fortunate resolution, I carry the knowledge of others whose stories ended in silence. And if my experience can prevent even one more soul from stepping unknowingly into the snare I barely escaped, perhaps some measure of meaning can be salvaged from the echoes of that harrowing night.